Hello and welcome. My name is Alan Mendenhall. I am the editor-in-chief and publisher of Southern Literary Review, and I'm joined here today by Candace Cox-Wheeler. This is her first novel. It is called Cradle in the Oak, and it is a page-turner. And Candy, it is great to have you here. I'd love to talk to you about the book, but first of all, I'm a lawyer, and I know you're a lawyer, and I'm just wondering how you had the time to put together a novel like this with all the demands of the practice of law.
Well, I'm kind of lucky in my profession because I've been practicing alongside my husband for the past 40 years, and he understands if I want to take a little extra time to do something different by this time. We've been married 40 years too, so that says something about our relationship. And what I did was I took the mornings to work on writing and went into the office from 1 to 5 every afternoon and was able to, put my work together that way.
That makes sense. So this book takes place in coastal settings in the early 20th century.
Right.
You have over 90 real life characters, and you have actual places featured in what is otherwise a fictional novel. So this is historical fiction.
Right.
Inspiration for this novel came from a newspaper clipping you discovered among your husband's grandmother's possessions. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of the book. Tell us how you decided to write an entire story based upon these newspaper clippings you found.
Well, we found the clipping among her possessions, and it's actually a story about her. And it was a story about her in her first marriage. My husband comes from a subsequent marriage, and it was about how her husband had left in the middle of the night with their 2 children and his mistress. And she had to figure out where to go look for them, how to go look for them. And at the turn of the century, we were in 1906, it wasn't easy for a woman to travel and go search for her husband and her children. So she had to come up with a unique way to do this. And the only thing I could find from the newspaper clipping is that it said she was handicapped by traveling alone across country. So she cut her hair, donned masculine garments, and changed her name to Harry. Well, that, Alan, had me hooked. I
guess so.
This is interesting. I wonder, what happened after that. But unfortunately, it was a deep, dark family secret, I guess, because no one in the family really knew anything about her journey or, how she went about trying to get her kids back. So that's where I decided, okay, I'm going to invent something.
Yeah.
And that's when I started doing the historical research and trying to figure out how can I blend these real life characters, like you said, about 90 of them over the course of the novel, with this creative account of, how she actually was able to find her children.
Well, I think that's fascinating. And your protagonist, the fictional protagonist, is Carrie Barnes, and like your husband's, was it grandmother? It was
his grandmother.
Grandmother. Carrie Barnes wakes up to find her husband has abandoned her and has left with the children and the babysitter. Now she has to figure out how to support herself.
Right.
Does so by finding work in Biloxi, Mississippi with a seafood company. And I would imagine that it required a lot of research for you to understand not just the time and the place, but the industry and the type of work that Carrie would find. Tell me a little bit about how that research occurred and where you went to find that sort of information. So information about mundane things, we're not talking about major news events, but just quotidian experiences in a town like Biloxi.
Right. Well, I started with just whatever books I could find that had pictures of Biloxi at that time and information about the seafood industry. Then I went to our local library and our history department there, and our historian, Jane Shambra, led me through all of the different things that she had available. And then we have a huge beautiful seafood museum, and I went up there and did some research up there. And
Eat some good
uh,
seafood, by the way. I've had
yeah,
seafood where you're from, and it's good.
it is, and you'll find a lot of it, as you saw it in my novel. We still have some of the same seafood prepared the same way on the coast today. So they say, write what you know. I wrote that based on many meals down here on the coast that I've enjoyed.
That was research, right? We're
Right.
gonna go out to dinner, have a nice glass of, have some wine and maybe some Creole food, and it's gonna be research.
Right, exactly. And one of the interesting things I found in my research was that during that same time period, women were not involved a lot in the managing process of the seafood factory, but there was this one woman, Sophie Desport, who is a real life character who worked alongside her husband. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to let my character, Carrie, be mentored by this woman and see where it goes from there. So that was something I picked up in my historical research and kind of ran with it. So
Yeah.
that's where we got.
Were there any people or events that you came across when you were researching that didn't make it into the novel somehow, but that you just found compelling and fascinating?
Yes, there were. I guess when you start writing, or in my case, when I started writing, first I had to convince myself that I could write.
Yeah.
I mean, I could write, legal documents, but I didn't know if I could really write creatively enough to keep my audience going and enjoying the pace of the novel. So once I started writing, the first draft was like 150,000 words, 500 typewritten pages. And of course, I was told, there's not a publisher that's going to look at something that large. You're going to have to cut that thing in half. So I did. I had to trim down, okay, which characters, really need to be in here, which scenes really need to be in here. And that's where some of the cutting came out.
And when did you know that you were writing a novel? I mean, did you know from the beginning, after finding those newspaper clippings and when you sat down to start writing, did you know right away that you were writing a novel, or did you just think you were toying with something that might be a short story? Or when did it strike you that I've got a whole novel here?
I hoped that it would turn out to be a novel. It's kind of been an ambition of mine to one day sit down. I majored in journalism and political science before I went to law school, so I had that love of writing. But I didn't realize that I could be so prolific until I actually started writing the words on the paper, and then of course, all the rewrites that you have to do in the process. That's when I actually learned how to write.
That's right. Well, that's what they say, the process of writing is rewriting. So I think there's
Exactly.
a lot to that. But you have an advantage as a lawyer, I have to say. I can't recall, some famous person said once that a lawyer reads and writes more than any novelist because of the nature of the legal profession and the work that's required. And I don't doubt that. That's part of the reason why I'm in higher education now.
Right.
I'm kidding. But
Right.
I want to ask you about sort of the process of finding a publisher. We have, I usually don't ask people about this in the interviews, but so many people want to know about it. In fact, at Southern Literary Review, we get emails from people asking if we can help facilitate networking between agents and publishers, because we deal with so many in the process of receiving books, and we deal with a lot of publicists. And so I'm wondering if you would be willing to talk just briefly about that process for you. I think people are interested in that.
Well, in my case, what I did is I didn't really know anything at all about that process. It was all new to me. So
and most people don't. I mean, I think that's why they email us. If they're emailing us, they clearly don't know.
well, I went to a class at USM that was the Oshner Lifelong Learning Institute. And it was in the mornings. It was taught by a fellow friend of mine who's an author, Johnny Bernhard.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think you're familiar with Johnny.
You're going to steal my question. I was going to ask you how you knew Johnny and what your relationship was. That's really fascinating. Well, I'm glad we're getting
Yeah.
to that. So,
I went to her class, and it was a 6-week class, and that's where I learned everything I needed to learn about how to look for publishers, how to write a query letter, just the whole process. She was very helpful, and we became close friends after that, and are still close friends today from that, just going to that class. And then after that, she said, well, you need to start going to some conferences. So I started going to literary conferences and picked up some information along the way. And I was lucky in my quest because I knew that I wanted to get a local or a Mississippi publisher if I could. And I sent a query letter to Joe Lee with Dogwood Press, and he said, okay, Candy, this looks good, but you need to do some work. And he kind of guided me on how to make the plot move along quicker, how to make it more interesting. And we went back and forth. I'd send him some more work. He'd contact me and say, okay, I'm not going to actually give you a contract or anything until we get to the point where I feel like you have a novel here. So we went back and forth for probably 2 years, Alan, before he was comfortable with my story, and I felt like, I still had the story I wanted to tell.
well, it's a beautiful story, and the book is so well done. Dogwood Press did a great job. This is just a handsome hardback copy here. It smells good. I'm the type of person who smells books. It's a little weird, but I mean, it's just so well done and so well written, and I'm excited for you, and excited for our readers to have the opportunity to get their hands on this book. Tell us in closing a little bit about the title, Cradle in the Oak.
Okay, it wasn't my first title, but it came to me at the very end. I wanted something that sounded literary, but I just kept thinking, what can I say that shows the South? Yeah. And I had a sentence in the very first chapter about Carrie looking through her window out at the old oak tree and seeing the branch that almost touched the ground and visualizing her sons who were no longer there on that empty branch. And that branch to me said cradle. It cradles close to the ground, so that's where Cradle in the Oak came from.
Well, that's a beautiful scene, and it's a beautiful book, a story of family and love and loss and all kinds of interesting twists and turns. So I would encourage our readers to pick up Cradle in the Oak, order it online. Obviously, you can go to Dogwood Press's website, but on Amazon and all other places. And Candy, it's a real pleasure to meet you finally, even if it's only via Zoom, right?
Right. Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about my story here today, and I enjoy meeting you, Alan. I've read so many of your books, so I have one in the background here.
I didn't even realize that. How about that? Yeah.
Writers on Writing.
I didn't even notice that. That's great.
Yeah, in fact, that did give me some direction too along this journey. So I appreciate you putting that out there for us new authors.
Oh, well, that's absolutely fascinating. Well, thank you for that. And thanks for the compliment. I really appreciate it. Well, Candy, I'm so glad that you came here and had this discussion. Again, it's Cradle in the Oak, everybody. Candace Cox Wheeler. So Candy, have a great weekend, and we will we'll do this again when you write your second. How about that?
That sounds good. I've already started.
Oh, good. That's great to know. All right. Well, thank you, Candy, and we will talk again.
Okay. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks. Bye-bye.